911, what is your emergency?
Units respond code 3 to a 1050 on the highway. Vehicles are blocking multiple
We're en route
lanes
to the
of travel.
hospital. Patient is currently having
We've got a
cardiac
4-alarm
arrest and has
fire
been
here.
intubated.
Send additional
Protesters are
trucks.
outside of City Hall and they are not complying with our
Out
orders
on 1,
to
hold the
disperse.
air.
In a rapidly changing world for first responders, where it seems that every day the rules and norms are changing, there is one voice you can count on to give you the latest in emergency news. That is Lifeline. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Lifeline 911 Podcast with your host, Erica.
Hello.
I am your co-host, Gary, and today we are going to be discussing active listening, or how to hear what's really being said, even when it's not being said. Hopefully we can unpack that somewhat complicated idea today. I think we can, at least.
I think we can try. We'll try not to take a long time, but you're right. It is something you kind of have to unpack. It's not a simple thing.
Right. So a lot of times, especially on like 911 calls, you'll have people call in, and you as the call taker have to listen to not only what exactly they are saying, but you also have to kind of pay attention to their tone of voice and to what they're not saying equally as much.
Yep.
You've got, of course, the classic sort of, hi, Grandma, how are you doing? I'm fine. Or you have the, hey, I would like to order a large pizza for 6 people, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, those are sort of scenarios where people are, you know, calling for help and they can't speak freely. So
Yes.
how can a 911 call taker sort of successfully listen to that and work through that?
One thing that comes to my mind immediately is don't assume, or maybe don't take at face value the thing that the person is saying. So when you get someone on the phone that seemingly isn't making any sense, I think it's important to almost take a step back. And I hate to keep saying the word over and over again, but I think it applies. You have to really listen. And for the 911 operator, at least for me, I know when I took calls, I had to learn to not take at face value what they're saying. Really try to determine, are they really calling to order a pizza or a taxi, or is there possibly more to this?
Right, because it's a lot of times people do get kind of creative when they call and they're in dangerous situations. When people dial 911, they typically know that they're doing it, especially if they're like an adult and somebody that's not, you know, with a mental health problem of some kind. So they know that they've called 911. So, and generally when you do your greeting of, you know, this is the police, you know, what is the nature of your emergency or whatever your greeting is, you know, that really will key them into being, I'm on a 911 line. So you're not going to try ordering a pizza accidentally, I suppose. So listening to, like, you know, and picking that up and taking it as a real problem, you know, as a real situation that needs to be addressed is really important, because you're going to have to be creative with the questions that you ask,
Yes.
because they're not going to be able to tell you, oh yes, this guy has the gun and this is what he's wearing and this is where he's at. You know, you've got to figure out a more clever way to ask that.
And it's so good that you said that, because even though I know it to be true, it didn't even register as we were, you know, kind of prepping for the conversation. The greeting is a tip off to the caller that they are indeed calling 911, especially as an adult. It becomes obvious, or at least you think. And so for them to hear that greeting, you know, in our case, Austin 911, do you need police, fire, EMS, or mental health services? That's a whole lot of first responder options that you're throwing at that person. And so for them to hear all of that, for the cue to begin to speak, right? Because they have to hear all of that, wait for it to stop, and then launch into whatever it is they're going to say. And for them to do that and still lead with pizza or grandma or vacation or, you know, I'd like to
Yeah.
get a hotel room. That I'm so glad you said it that way because it just broke through for me even, and I've been doing this since God was a boy.
Hmm. Yeah, and a lot of times when people call in, like to listen to those cues. So you've got to think of, you know, ways in which they are asking questions and giving you answers. So, they'll be like, I remember taking a call last year, I think it was, where this lady called in and she was in a hotel room with some bad dudes, and she was just like, "Hi, Grandma. How are you doing? Yeah, I'm over here at the hotel with Richard or whatever the guy's name was. Yeah, it's the one off of such and such streets. Yeah, yeah, room
Wow.
221. Yeah." And so, just kind of, first off, you want to confirm, like, are you in a situation you can't talk? Just
Yes.
just to be 100% clear, so you could proceed. And then trying to figure out like what exactly is going on, because generally they can answer yes or no questions, but really anything beyond that is sometimes hard to do.
Yeah. Well, and you don't want to out them, right? You don't want to
Right.
force them to. Uh, you don't want to present a question that forces them to say something that might tip off the person that's sitting right there or right across the room. That
Hmm.
they're actually on the phone with 911. So you would present the answer to where they can say yes or no. So are you at, let's say, or the hotel, are you off of I-35 and say 12th Street? Yeah, yeah, we're right by there. Or, okay, then you start narrowing it down. Is it the Marriott? No, it's that other one that's across the street, the one nearest the Denny's. Oh, okay, the
Hmm.
Doubletree, those kinds of things. You would literally have to they feed them the question with the answer in it so that are able to say kind of yes and no.
It challenges your creativity,
Hmm.
because you're trying to like get this information, like you know, without, as you said, kind of like revealing or blowing their cover that they're calling 911.
Yeah.
So it's important to pay attention to all the little things that you like hear on the phone when that's happening. So if you hear like a train going by, you can you know narrow that down to like wherever in town there are train tracks. Generally,
Yes.
it's a good starting point. Or if you hear, I don't know, like a motorboat, you can know that it's going to be something near the water. Just these little things like that that really are critical to trying to get that location, especially the more the person is not at liberty to talk.
Yeah. And it makes me think about, here we go with just Hollywood, but like the very last episode that we did, we talked about Hollywood and how sometimes they absolutely get it right. And this isn't one of those. I was just watching one episode of, I think it was the primary 911, where the 911 operator, Maddie, had a lady on the phone and she was basically being kidnapped by her neighbor who was obsessed with her. And I'm really going somewhere.
Hmm.
And she's on the phone with Maddie and she's driving and she really starts telling Maddie, hi. I'm wondering if you have any rooms available tonight. We're a family of three and we're going to need an extra crib. And I mean, just all of this stuff. And for a second, Maddie goes, "You do know you're calling 911." She's like, "Oh, yes, I'm absolutely aware. I'm sure it's probably last minute, all the things." And then a light bulb goes on. And
Hmm.
Maddie starts doing that very thing we're talking about. She starts feeding her the, the, the answers to her question in a way that she can answer either yes or no. Or I think she said, if you're being kidnapped, tell me that you need a room for, 3 o'clock, or ask about a 3 o'clock check in or something like that. And the woman goes, oh, yeah, 3 o'clock would be just great. And not to beat a dead horse, but I think it's so important that we drive home, especially to our less seasoned, any 911 operators that might be listening that are less seasoned and have yet to take a call like that or find themselves in that situation. I think the most important thing is to don't discount whatever you hear. Everything has meaning in that case to determine whether it is a prank or it's not.
Yeah. And I mean, those calls are very rare. I think I've probably only taken maybe half a dozen. Now I haven't been doing calls in a long time, but they're not really common. So it's always
No.
kind of good to think about how you want to handle that, because generally on those calls I found that the callers are really good about being creative with their answers and
Yeah.
good about that. Like it's always impressive to me how they are able to relay information without really missing a beat on that. So
And you know what? That's so true because as you were talking, I was thinking they become an active participant in the call and not just because typically in an emergency situation, the caller is, they're in a heightened state, right? They are afraid, they are angry or confused, any of those things
yeah,
that are going on. And so a lot of times the 911 operator has to take charge and guide the call. And that's not, that doesn't change in these, but I think, like you said, it's kudos to the caller who has to first figure out what they're going to say to trigger your critical thinking.
yeah, and it's really like they, as you said, that what are they going to say to trigger your critical thinking?
Yeah.
And it's really great because you've got sort of, I don't want to say like it feels like you're working as a team, but it really does. Like you and the
Yeah.
caller are both working to try and get over this hurdle, this obstacle, and you work with one another. Whereas usually when you take a 911 call, even at the best of times, it feels more just like you're the one just probing and inquiring
Yeah.
as you would expect, and then at the worst of times, it kind of feels like you're antagonistic towards each other in terms
Sure.
of what you're trying to do. But
Yeah.
really on like these types of calls, I think it's the most when you feel like, hey, we're both working on this problem together and we're both committed to solve it. So I think that's a really kind of positive takeaway from that, if there's one.
Sure. And as we're talking, I just thought about a situation where you have to really actively listen. And it's almost more important nowadays because we do have, I don't want to be delicate in the way that I say this, we do have a segment of our citizenry, if you will, that struggle with mental health concerns and diagnoses. And I don't know about you, but if we're honest, as an industry, I think sometimes we are bombarded with what we would call emotionally disturbed people that are, people that have those concerns and they might be in crisis. And so when they call, I think it's doubly, if not triply important that we use every active listening skill that we have to determine if it is indeed a real emergency, because human nature suggests that we would just throw them off because, oh, EDP, and we stop listening and therefore we just stop trying. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. I mean, because have the callers that just report crazy things like aliens are living in my teeth and there's people in the walls.
Yeah.
But if you're actively listening and also maybe doing a little bit of investigating when they call in, or if you know them and you're like, yeah, they report aliens living in their teeth all the time, but they've never reported people in their walls before.
Right.
And it turns out that somebody did break into their house and is living in their attic. That has happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because even in those moments, they can become, I guess, I don't know, I guess, aware enough to be like the same caller that you would think of who's calling grandma, who is calling, um, calling to order a pizza, because they have to, again, listen through all of the prompts, all of the options in a 911 greeting. Doesn't matter where you are, whether it's pre-recorded like ours or you have to say it every time. They are still having to navigate that menu and then respond. So even if we know that they typically are, someone that's a frequent flyer, if you will, calls a lot and doesn't have a legitimate emergency, what if this is that time?
Yeah, because you never know. I mean, and that is one of the, you know, challenges of the job, because when you have, you know, the same person come to you with the same problem again and again and again, maybe, you know, hundreds of times,
Hmm.
you know, staying fresh and willing to actually listen and hear what they're saying,
Yeah.
for that one time that they do actually have a problem, is a challenge to stay frosty, I suppose, as they would say.
Stays. I like that. That's good. Okay.
Yeah.
Stay frosty.
But yeah, it's important to, you know, keep your ears, you know, sharp, I suppose,
Yeah.
to hear the changes in what they're saying, or even just how they're saying it. There's so many times that people are trying to communicate things to you,
Hmm.
and they either don't have the words to do it, or they don't have the emotional stability to do it, but you still need to try and suss out what you can as best you can. And thankfully, there's so many tools we have nowadays that make it so we don't have to necessarily worry so much about trying to find a location to somebody, because
Yeah.
there's technologies that give you a somewhat accurate location that you can at least start a search for.
It's true.
So all you've got to do is find, is this a call that needs to be entered, or is this the ramblings of some incoherent crazy person? So
Yeah.
just kind of figuring out which side of that spectrum it's falling on.
And that's even harder because you don't have the benefit of facial expression or body language. So all you have is the tone of their voice and what they're saying and what they're not saying. And I don't know where I heard this, or maybe it just was created in my own head, but we are professional listeners. I've heard this, right? We listen
Hmm.
for a living.
Yeah.
We hear what you say, how you say what you say. We hear what you don't say, and we also hear how you say what you don't say.
That's a simple. Put that on a bumper sticker, and you're good to go.
I mean, seriously, I need to put that on a shirt someplace because I'm serious. I don't know if I heard it somewhere. Yeah, or if it just, through the years, because again, I've been doing it a really long time. And so maybe it's just something that I came up with over time. But the same thing can be true on the other side of the house and for
Hmm.
us as dispatchers.
Yes, yeah. Dispatching, you can absolutely use the same skill sets in terms of listening to what's being said and what's being not said in the tone. And you also have the advantage of generally somewhat knowing the person who's talking, so
Yes.
that is also a help as well.
Yes. I don't know about you, but and I'm sure because you've been doing this a really long time, like me, and most of our careers has been radio. So there you hear these officers every day, and so you learn what they sound like when they are not stressed, and you hear what they sound like when maybe they're amped up a little bit, and you develop an ability to listen to them that is, you don't have that benefit when you're on the phone with someone because you don't talk to these people every day, but you still have to listen. And I would say listen through to what's really going on, because I've had that happen to me where an officer will key up and he'll say very casually, I need just, send me 2 or 3 more units. And he says it so quickly and so casually that it almost sounds like he's saying I'm code 4.
Hmm.
And then my brain goes, wait, that wasn't what did he say? And something in your gut, for lack of a better way to put it, says, don't, this is not the time to say 10-9 or repeat. You kind of have to play it back in your mind and not on that, what I call the crutches, the playback. Don't get me started. It's a whole other thing. You heard what you heard and you trust what you heard, and now you react.
Hmm.
I don't know about you, but I've had that happen to me where they've just been so casual and they're in a situation, okay? They're about to be in it, where they're about to go hands on, fisticuffs, if you will. And I have to immediately determine, what did they say, and just go with it.
Yeah, and it's, as you said, like they'll say something and you're like, okay, just because a lot of times listening for just the tone of the voice, you get used to how different things are said. Like if someone's like just kind of low key, you're gonna have a different approach to it than you would if they were like amped up. So
Yeah.
hearing what they're saying, like, yeah, send me another couple units if you could, is, you're like, oh, why do they need additional units on, this? But then just kind of get that started.
Yeah. Well, and what trips you up a lot of times, and I know for me as a baby dispatcher, I didn't have the confidence to respond solely on what was said. I wanted, I don't know if justification is really the word I'm looking for, but I would say I just didn't have the confidence to trust what I heard because the tone of voice didn't match the request. So if they're saying send me more units, they're going, they're I need more units, chop chop. That's what you hear. You go, oh, okay, I know exactly what that is.
As a supervisor, a lot of times what you're doing is you'll be listening to like all the different radio channels in the city at the same time. So you really can't generally, especially when it's really busy, pick out individual, words and phrases because it's just this wall of chatter at times. But what you are listening for is that change in tone. You're listening for like that amped up. And so kind of going on the individual dispatcher level, you're also doing that, but you also have the added ability of being able to hear when, there's not a change of tone when you think there ought to be, which can send you an indicator that something may not be working correctly at the scene.
Basically, I know exactly what that is when I hear an officer say, send me more units, super amped up. I don't have to worry about that. I don't need to actively listen. I just need to respond in the way that I'm supposed to because it doesn't require any active listening. It's just there for me. I would just say for active listening on the radio side, it's not as difficult because you are, in fact, you kind of have a relationship with the officers, even if you don't work with them all the time, or if you've never worked with them. And I think that is the benefit of what you were saying earlier about you get accustomed to the way certain things are said.
Yeah, just like the cadence of how you'd say, like, I need you to run the license plate,
Yes. Yes. That's the word I was looking for, the cadence, because there's a certain rhythm to the way certain things are said, or, like, let's just go with the simple thing. Show us code 4, or we don't need any more units, or we're good. Whatever that code is for someone who might not be in our agency, whatever that sounds like, pretty much sounds the same.
Yeah.
No matter who says it, no matter if they got a really, really deep voice, or if it's, a female officer with a really high pitched voice, the rhythm of that thing sounds the same. Or
Yes.
start me a wrecker, or, can you make a call back? I mean, just simple 2729. Can you run a license plate? Any of those typical things, you don't have to worry about it because even I know you're right about it because I have been do off in la la land. I'm ashamed to admit it, but it's true. Just looking at the shiny lights on the ceiling, and someone says something, and I go, I heard it. It sounded like that. No, it wasn't that. It wasn't that. Oh, got it. It was that. Simply because of the rhythm of how it was said.
Because sometimes, especially on like the radio or the phone, you won't necessarily be able to make out the words that are being said.
Yes.
But you can still hear the tone of it a lot of times.
And the cadence of it. And that helps you deduce. And it helps you deduce because you're like, it wasn't that. It couldn't have been that because I've heard that 1,500 times. And I know what that sounds like. And so by the process of elimination, you figure it out, which again, I guess, maybe not again, it almost sounds like guessing, but I have to agree with you. I think it's more really demonstrating the ability to actively listen to deduce what it is that's being said.
I suppose it is a bit of guesswork, but it's educated guesswork. You're relying on your experience to tell you, A plus B is going to equal C, 99% of the time,
Yeah.
I guess if you're like a pilot flying a plane, you're going to, rely on your instruments if you're in the fog.
Yeah.
And just the same as you're relying on your the skill sets that you've honed over months or years doing the job to figure out when things are unclear and shrouded
Yeah.
in the proverbial fog.
Wow.
Yeah, I took that all the way around.
I love it. That's amazing. That's a
Thank you.
skill set in and of itself.
It is. It has made me a famous podcaster. So there you have it.
Okay. All righty then. So I guess you could take that to active listening because, most of what we do is done either over a radio or over the phone. It's not in person. But for us, in our jobs every day as supervisors, we have people that are face to face with us. And sometimes we have to actively listen, even though we have the benefit of facial expression and body language. Even those sometimes aren't dead giveaways to what the real problem is. And we have to listen to actually understand what is being said versus what most people do, which is as someone's talking, they're formulating a response even in that moment. Does that make sense?
If you're trying to formulate your response before the other person finishes talking, you're not really listening to what they're saying, and it's really rude, actually.
Yeah.
So you want to wait for them to finish and then give your response to that, because it's not a race to jump in there as soon as you can. It's not anything like that. You're trying to give your input to what they said and trying to understand what they said. What is it? The quote. Seek first to understand and then to be understood.
Yes. Perfect. Yes.
I just made that up.
Well, even
No,
if you
not
did just
really.
make it up, it is absolutely relevant to the conversation. So well said.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
But yeah, active listening is a key component to a successful career in emergency response, whether you're behind the headset or even really in front of it, as you were kind of going into in terms of listen to how people are talking to you and their body language in person, if you're fortunate enough to have that, because that's really where so much of communication is done. It's not what you say, it's how you're saying it.
Agreed. And then you have all of you have the icing on the cake is the facial expression and body language. But I think it's harder and it requires more skill when we do what we do every day. And I think that is what makes 911 so important in emergency response, because they're the first responder, I know, but they are conducting the very first interview in whatever is going to be whatever this investigation is going to be. And they have the challenge of listening through chaos to what is really being not only said by the person on the phone, but what's happening in the background.
Yeah, and you always want to be paying attention, because you never want to be that guy that doesn't really use your active listening skills, and you're just like, oh, this person was just ordering a pizza, and you hang up on them, and then they call again ordering a pizza, and they get one of your coworkers who does listen, puts the call in, it becomes a major thing on CNN, and then they're like, the first call taker ignored them. Here's his call, and then you got to live with that the rest of your life.
It's very true, and I'll tell you what, it takes that takes us all the way back to out of the mouths of babes.
Yeah,
That's another when you have children callers, they are, their voices are very small. They don't know exactly how to express what's happening, and you have to actively listen in a way that I think you have to it takes more of that skill set, even when you have a child caller, because now you're trying to determine what's going on and from someone who doesn't know how to really convey it.
Most people, even adults, don't really know how to convey what is going on. So
That's true.
those skills are ever useful. They don't fade. We appreciate you all actively listening to us during this podcast. But that will be it for this week. From all of us at Lifeline 911 Podcast, I'm Gary.
I'm Erica.
And we will see you next week. Thank you for watching our production of Lifeline 911 Podcast. If you have any questions about the topics we discussed today, or if there's something specific you'd like us to cover in a future episode, send us your questions at lifeline911podcast@gmail.com. Stay safe out there. Until next time, this is Lifeline 911 signing off.